Where does the Miami Dolphins roster stand after the first week of the 2024 league calendar year? We are ranking the team's updated team needs today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tip of the cap to our everydayers, because it is your team every day. Today's Monday, March 18th, 2024. And today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase on last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Today, we are looking at the Dolphins roster and roles within the Dolphins roster that you perceive as still being prominent needs that need to be addressed in some way, shape, or form between now and the start of training camp. And you know full well they aren't all going to get done before now and June 2nd when the dollars open up for the Dolphins from Xavier Howard and his post-June 1st cut. So let's make that disclaimer right now. We're going to go through 6 different positions / roles within the roster that I think are the 6 most pressing for the Dolphins roster as things currently stand. And I don't expect they're all going to get filled right here and now. Now, part of the strategy of that is how do you choose to go about prioritizing what to fill and how to fill and who to fill it with and what the cost is and what's the opportunity cost elsewhere? And it's the continuously unanswerable question of any given offseason for all 32 teams, right? It's extremely difficult to anticipate how to perfectly thread that needle. But what I can tell you is this. Let's start here. The Dolphins, through the first week of negotiations and being able to agree to terms with players and the start of the league calendar year on Wednesday, they retained several of their own talents, but they have brought in the following external talent has been reported as of this recording. It's Monday at about 10 a.m. Linebacker Jordan Brooks, edge rusher Shaquille Barrett, cornerback Kendall Fuller, center Aaron Brewer. Excuse me, I want to get the enunciation right or the emphasis right on his name. It's Aaron Brewer. He disclosed that during his introductory press conference. Safety Jordan Poyer and tight end Jonnu Smith. Those 6 are probably starters. I would not be surprised if defensive tackle Benito Jones is your starting nose tackle. So 6.5. You also have Anthony Walker at linebacker, Neville Gallimore at defensive tackle, Sirod Neal, a big-time special teams contributor from Buffalo, Davion Nixon at defensive tackle as well, and then Jody Fortson, a high upside add at the tight end position. So the Dolphins have been busy. They have agreed to terms at least with all of these players. And I use the phrasing agree to terms because you may look on Spot Track or Over the Cap, and you may see the Dolphins somewhere between $3 and $4.5 million in cap space as of this morning. It's not up to date. They don't have the terms for all these contracts. In reality, Miami is much more narrow on the cap than the $3 to $4.5 million that the resources are showing. It's almost useless to try to stay up to speed with this many transactions happening across the entirety of the league. But what I've done is I've outlined based off of, okay, here's the roster. You're expecting all of these guys, or at least the majority of these guys, maybe some of the interior defensive linemen, not. Like we didn't mention Isaiah Mack. We didn't mention Jonathan Harris. There's going to be a lot of competition there. The vast majority of that list of players is going to make the Dolphins' 53-man roster. What needs stand out most significantly? We're going to start on the offensive side of the football. I did this for Touchdown Miami, Substack. If you're not familiar, it's long-form written content. I'm now doing Dolphins coverage over there. It's called Touchdown Miami. You can find it there. But the story that I put out over the weekend was the 3 most pressing needs on either side of the ball. What I did not do that I'm doing here is I'm going to rank them. I think the Dolphins' 3 most pressing offensive needs are the wide receiver 3 position, the swing tackle position, and a starting guard position, at least one. So you may have potentially 4 adds that are necessary there. Let's start with wide receiver 3. The current contenders in this spot are a third-year player who dealt with injury last year in Eric Ezukanma, who the team seemed to have a really big role for and tried to plug with Chase Claypool, and that did not go with a lot of success. I would not expect to see Chase Claypool back. I'm not particularly interested in seeing Chase Claypool back. But the other contender for wide receiver right now, based on the names on the roster, or names that are attached to Miami, because I don't believe this player signed yet, Braxton Berrios agreed to terms with Miami to come back for a deal up to $3 million for the 2024 season. That is a reduced rate from 2024. Braxton, I think where he's best is the shallow underneath, trying to separate, although when we did deep dives, his usage in that area of the field didn't yield a ton of success. I think you'd really benefit from having a different dynamic as your third wide receiver than Braxton Berrios, but I would also not turn my nose up to a guy with solid hands who is stereotypically quicker than fast as a slot guy, who's not going to be a volume player in your offense, but can take checkdowns and work underneath and be an adequate presence on your kick return game, which I think is where Braxton Berrios. I'm not mad that Braxton Berrios is back, and I know some people are, but Braxton Berrios, from a special teams perspective, totally fine player to have. The floor for special teams in 2023 versus 2022, from a kick return standpoint, Berrios was much better at handling kicks than everything Miami automatically fair caught in 2022. But I don't think that's the makings of a wide receiver 3. I think Eric Ezukanma gives you a little something else. But Eric Ezukanma, how much do you really want to put from eggs in that basket for a player who had a promising preseason and moved all around in limited snaps in week 1 and part of week 2? And that was the last we saw of Eric Ezukanma. I think it'd be irresponsible to not have a player you envision a large role for, or at least a hedge from Ezukanma, who was a 4th-round draft selection that you're not super married to because success rate for 4th-round picks, it's not particularly high. Do I still have high hopes for Ezukanma? Yes. Would I put all my eggs in that basket and not ask any more questions about it? No, I would not. The swing tackle position is currently between really the only other 2 tackles on the roster, which is Keon Smith and Ryan Hayes. Ryan Hayes, of course, the team's last draft pick from 2023, did not make the 53, gets plucked off of waivers, goes to the Colts. He's there for a cup of coffee, and then he comes back, spends the season on the practice squad for Miami. It's nice that they get him back. Keon Smith, really intriguing player. I like this tape a lot, but he only played 70 snaps of NFL football last year. That was his first true game action. A lot of it came in garbage time, where we're firing off the ball and blowing people up and running off the line of scrimmage, and he did a really good job of it. But just like with Ezukanma, the role for Keon Smith, the resume, I should say, for Keon Smith at this stage, it's just so light that you've got a guy in Tron Armstead who takes a reduced cost, and really the only reason you got a reduced cost off his salary is because of injuries. He missed 7 games. Kendall Lamb played over 600 snaps for you offensively last year. Do you want Keon Smith to be the uncontested swing? Now, he did play left and right tackle, but do you have any level of peace of mind despite how good he looked? I don't. I think that is a pressing need for the Dolphins. And when we get to the end, we're going to rank them in order. The other offensive need is low-hanging fruit. It is guard. The Dolphins did well to find a parallel type of cost and contract for a parallel skill set in Aaron Brewer from Connor Williams. Now, I do think Connor, it is a step down, I think, from what Connor has shown to be, but I do think Aaron Brewer in this system, particularly if he stays at center year over year and can get some consistency. He said in his introductory press conference, Aaron Brewer said that this is the first time he played center for a full season since like middle school. I think he can be a quality starter in the system, but at guard, Your guys on the roster right now, you brought back Robert Jones on a 1-year deal. You have Liam Eichenberg in the last year of his deal. And you have Lester Cotton with 1 year left on his deal. Chasen Hines is the other name here, but not a guy who took snaps for Miami versus the other three who meaningfully did. You lost Robert Hunt. Isaiah Wynn's an expiring contract. Would I be surprised if Liam Eichenberg gets penciled into a starting job? No. I thought he was better at guard than center last year, but it did feel like his momentum kind of got killed a little bit because he played through a lower body injury, and it really sapped his athleticism. Do I think Liam Eichenberg has the ceiling to be a quality starter? No. Do I think in a perfect world he can take the Austin Jackson type leap? I would not rule it out just because the Austin Jackson turnaround was so stark. In a perfect world, you get two. If you told me Eichenberg was your 6th offensive lineman, because he could technically play all 5 spots, and Robert Jones was your predominant backup guard behind Eichenberg, I'd be pretty at peace with that if as long as you told me you had a swing tackle, and that would be your top 8, right? A starting 5, a swing tackle, Eichenberg as utility guy who's center guard flex, and then Robert Jones. But right now, 2 of Liam Eichenberg and Robert Jones are starting players, and Lester Cotton. Even if you said, okay, one of those 3 guys is going to step into one of the starting guard spots, you have another 1,000 snap role that needs to be filled that ideally you fill with 1 player as compared to 3 players, which is what it was last year for Miami. So those are the 3 offensive areas of need for me that are the most pressing. We'll get into the defensive side of the ball next year on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood is the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at Robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. This claim is as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply and to IRAs and 401ks. The 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. And you must keep your Robinhood IRA for 5 years. 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. So defensively for Miami, the 3 needs that I have as the most prominent and pressing and concerning start with the interior defensive line. And this is in spite of a smorgasbord of guys that have been brought in. Neville Gallimore from Dallas. Benito Jones, former Dolphin, went to Detroit, now back to Miami. Jonathan Harris, restricted free agent from the Denver Broncos. Deshaun Hand was here last year. Isaiah Mack. Davion Nixon. We're going to shotgun shell this till the cows come home, apparently, and just throw as many bodies as we can that we can economically acquire at the competition. But that is only going to take this team so far in their attempts to replace the presence of Christian Wilkins. Do I think Benito Jones could stand in and do a feasible job relative to what Raekwon Davis gave you as a nose tackle? Yes. I think the nose tackle spot with the addition of Benito Jones is a lot more of an ancillary need for Miami versus this other starting interior spot. Just like you have a starting guard spot that's open. At least the other 2 needs offensively are a 3rd wide receiver and a 3rd tackle. You got definitively a starter at guard that needs to be filled, if not 2. I think you definitively need a starter on the interior here. The most prominent name out of this group is Neville Gallimore. There's been a couple of seasons where he's played over 400 snaps defensively for Dallas, but it's been every other season. Goes through his whole rookie contract, never really takes the leap. The good news is you have Zach Sealer. The bad news is I don't see a lot of upside with the guys that are here to give you peace of mind to say, yeah, we can roll with what we got, just go with a rotation and move on. I mean, the vast majority of these guys are vet minimum guys. That's a very steep hole that's been left in the absence of Christian Wilkins, which it's not a coincidence, right? And the four that we've done, the most impactful felt openings are the ones vacated by a $100 million guard and a $110 million defensive tackle, whether Miami could have paid them that or not. The fourth edge spot is another significant gap that needs to be filled, but I do think it's one where you do have a little bit more fluidity than some of the other spots. I think this is a little bit more shade of a gray versus black and white when you consider what is the recovery status of Jaelan Phillips? What is the recovery status of Bradley Chubb? You do have Shaq Barrett in the ranks here, who's been a very long-tenured, successful NFL pass rusher. That can fill one spot. If you have Jaelan Phillips back, and he has his 9-month recovery window, and he's back for the start of the year, but Bradley Chubb needs to start the year on PUP, and you go Shaq Barrett and Jaelan Phillips, I think the third edge is a moderate need. If neither edge is going to be ready for the start of the season, it's a massive need for Miami. If both guys are going to be back for the start of the season, it's probably more of an ancillary need. So you're kind of in this weird limbo where even one of the backup players in Cameron Good, with the ruptured patellar tendon, what's his status look like? The current contenders right now behind Chubb, Phillips, and Barrett for the next edge guy on the roster is Quentin Bell and Zeke Vandenberg, who was a rookie last year who missed the whole season with injury. That's it needs another body, but the level of investment, I think, is a little bit more gray than definitively looking at defensive tackle and saying, we need this spot. Look at a guard and saying, we need this spot. So I think that's the uniqueness of the edge 4 spot. And the last one I have defensively is the safety 3 spot. Or is it the safety 2 spot? I don't know what their big picture plans are for how much they want to use Jordan Poyer. Is Jordan Poyer better in the Geno Stone role versus trying to fill the Kyle Hamilton / Marcus Williams roles of this Ravens defense? How much of Jalen Ramsey's positional flexibility and ambiguity mitigates the needs of another safety in that light because of what defensive weaponry Kyle Hamilton was for being a position flexible player? They'll run more 3 safety stuff than Fangio did, right? Because Fangio's whole MO was, we want to stay as vanilla as we can. That's why we're going to run primary nickel with a nickel corner, no matter what, because we want the quarterback to do all his processing post-snap. We don't want to tip our hand at all. Whenever we can, we want to be as vanilla as possible and force the quarterback to do all the work in a shorter amount of time. That was the ideology. This is not the same ideology. There's a lot more based off of what Baltimore did last year and what we've heard they plan to do with carrying stuff over from that same scheme. This is a lot more of we're going to match personnel and be matchup specific and move guys around to maximize their impact and get the most of their ability to be around the football. So I think a third safety right now, it's between Elijah Campbell, Saran Neal, and Nick Needham. All 3 of those guys are big-time special teams guys. Who has the highest ceiling defensively? Is it Nick because he's played in the nickel so he can play a little bit lower down? It's probably not Campbell just because Campbell's experiences in Miami have almost exclusively been on special teams. Saran Neal was a player who never really got looks on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, Needham's played the most defensive snaps out of the 3. Is that an upgradable spot? I think so, especially if you want to have Needham to be depth for you at corner as well. So it's an interesting conversation to try to sort through and say, okay, like where is the when they go big nickel, when they play a run-heavy team and they want to have 3 safeties on the field because they have to space the field a certain way because there's an athletic tight end out there, who's the third safety type? I don't think they have that on the roster, so that role stands out to me as well. So if I'm just looking at roles that I feel need to be filled, and they're the most pressing, the third wide receiver, the swing tackle, probably both guard spots for me personally. I would not be surprised if Miami only fills 1 and lets competition take care of the other one. That would be 4 offensively. The edge 4 spot, the other starting defensive tackle spot opposite Sealer, not qualifying the nose tackle, and then the third safety spot. That's 6/7 roles within the roster that I think are the most pressing. What does the intersection look like of filling those roles with good investments, what the Dolphins have at their disposal right now, and the level of intensity of the need? That's next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. You should not have to worry about the stress of going to your favorite sporting events because going to the game is all about fun, which is why Game Time has you covered. Get the tickets without the stress. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You could see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. And their all-in prices show you your total upfront, so you know you're getting a great deal before you put their tickets in your cart and go to checkout. You can buy tickets in seconds with just a few taps on your phone. And Game Time is obsessed with finding you ways to save money on your tickets, too. With zone deals, you can pick the section, and Game Time will pick the seats for big time savings. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON, LOCKEDON, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. For me, I like to look at positional needs and try to weigh it through the lens of how much you're going to be on the field. I think that's a really important part for me personally. Now, it's not the only factor in determining the severity of the need. The Dolphins have 2 of these 6 roles within the roster that I think are the most pressing roles that need addressing. 2 of them are full-time snap roles. 1 of them still will happen on a rotational basis. The most snaps to be filled is the starting guard spot. Now, there's a whole other argument to be had about positional value of guards versus your center and the athleticism of your center and the IQ of your center and making calls, and subsequently the tackles and the ability to play on an island versus guards always being a position group that has bumpers around them, and how teams, most teams, not the Carolina Panthers, but most teams feel like the guard is the final piece of the puzzle, and it can be a get-by spot in many cases. We certainly don't want that to be the case for Miami because Miami is trying to fortify and evolve and take their offensive line to the next level. The most snaps in a single spot is the guard spot, though. The starting defensive tackle spot could be a 600 to 700 snap role within the defense. I don't think you're going to see the Christian Wilkins 900 plus snaps. I don't think that's necessarily a realistic expectation for any player to step into and come into and provide that level of impact for you. But that is a role that is among the bigger roles to be filled from a snap perspective of the roles that we've gone over. I think the wide receiver 3 spot ideally is next highest, but you really can't dismiss the possibility of it being the swing tackle spot just because of Teron Armstead's durability issues. Last year, that was a 600 snap role. Ideally, it's less than that. Realistically, it is a pretty significant workload. If you had to guess, you'd probably say they're both about 400 to 500 snaps apiece. Now, for Miami, last year, Cedric Wilson took about 550 snaps. That was the next highest snap taker that they had, versus 600 plus snaps for Kendall Lamb, your swing tackle on last year's roster. I think safety 3 kind of falls in that same bucket between 400 and 600 snaps apiece. Just because you are going to be personnel matching and down and distance specific, and week to week, so a guy might play 50 snaps. The next week he might play 12 snaps. Just don't do it when it's your best linebacker on the roster, like the Miami tried to do at the beginning of the year last year. And then the edge 4 spot is the wild card, because it's impossible to quantify right now on March 18th how big of a need that's going to be. We've seen some really promising glimpses of Jaelan Phillips in his rehab. It would not be unheard of based off of recovery timelines. And I know Chris Perkins did this story. Timelines for players that are on the Dolphins that endured ACL and Achilles tears, what their return to action looked like. If both of those guys are back, I think it is last on the list, the edge 4 spot, because you still have Shaq Barrett. And because you have Shaq Barrett as an accomplished player, I would be inclined to say edge 4 is the least pressing of the 6, but it is still an important role that needs to be addressed and will or should be addressed with at least some addition between now and the start of training camp at the end of July. So I would put the edge 4 spot 6th. My next most pressing is probably the safety 3 spot, and the reason being we've already alluded to the positional flexibility of Jalen Ramsey. We've kind of alluded to the positional flexibility of Nick Needham. Javon Holland is a player who is capable of moving all around. Jordan Poyer last year, I think he played out of position, and I don't think it did him any favors, but he played low in the box. Cam Smith at South Carolina has played on the outside and on the inside. Kader Kohou can play on the outside and in the inside. I think you have enough ambiguity with where a lot of those players are capable and have lined up in their careers that the safety 5 spot, or the safety 3 spot, goes in the 5 hole in the rankings just because you have enough versatility in your secondary. Kendall Fuller, who we didn't mention at all, can play outside and inside. So like you have a lot of guys who can be in the nickel, some guys who could step back to safety, some guys who could play on the second level, some guys who could play on the perimeter. And there's enough overlap there that I feel better about that spot. As far as the 4th area of need, I would probably go with the swing tackle. And I'm hedging a little bit on Keon Smith to put it there. If you told me Teron Armstead was definitively going to miss 10 games this season, I would love for that not to be the case. But if you told me it was going to manifest itself and it was going to happen, then yeah, I would have the swing tackle spot higher on the list. But as things currently stand, I would put it 4th out of these 6, just because you do have 2 starters in front of it, and you have a young player who showcased an illustrated fit within the scheme, and quite frankly was more dynamic athletically than Teron Armstead was last year. Like he was on Austin Jackson's level for explosiveness and raw power getting out of blocks in the run game. How that correlates to the pass protection, that's anybody's guess. I would put this is where it gets hard because you have 2 starting spots, and then I think you have the role that most prominently impacts the mechanics of Miami's offense. The guard spot is the one that takes the most snaps. The interior defensive line spot is probably the biggest drop-off from what you have had to what you have. Wilkins to these other guys is the biggest drop-off from anything. But wide receiver 3 is kind of the spot where this offense is very skill-oriented and being able to win matchups individually and dictating spacing. I'd probably reluctantly put the wide receiver 3 role as the 3rd spot because it's the smallest snap role. But we saw what that looked like when the 2 studs that you had got banged up. You need to have somebody with a little bit of an engine behind it that can do some of the same things. And the Dolphins, frankly, did not. And I think it really hurt them. Now, some of that weight can also be bore by Jonnu Smith, who is a flex tight end type who can do a lot of the crack toss run game type stuff that you had Braxton Berrios and River Craycraft and Cedric Wilson doing. But he's a 240-pound tight end who can still run 21 miles per hour with the ball in his hands. That's a nice ambiguous layer in the same way that the secondary is. So when I put Jonnu Smith into this factor, I'm talking myself into the wide receiver 3 spot being the third most pressing need. I would say, just based off positional value, I would put the guard spot as the second most pressing need. And then I would put the interior defensive line spot as the most pressing need. Yes, the guard spot is more snaps, but you have more help. You have an easier responsibility to scheme around, where that interior defensive line spot, if you are going to have Neville Gallimore and Benito Jones, and whether it's Isaiah Mack or Davion Nixon or Deshaun Hand or Jonathan Harris, whoever that is, if that collection is the other B-gap defender or passing down defender for you, you're going to have to blitz a lot more, especially early in the season when Phillips and Chubb are getting their feet back underneath them. So I would have the interior defensive line need at number 1. I would have the guard spot at number 2. I would have the wide receiver 3 at number 3. And then I would probably go swing tackle 4, safety 3, 5, and then edge 4, 6, just based off of the potential of outcomes and really how frequently you can find a rotational pass rusher late in the process in the summertime. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion. Where this Dolphins roster stands, come back and see us again tomorrow. Fins up. I'm Kyle Krabs. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And I'm out of here.